this should be the last section that we're going to cover today. And all we're going to do here is use these 4 functions that we've built in our database operations. So these were our add item, get all items, update item, and delete item functions. And we're just going to learn where and how to call upon these functions in obviously the appropriate locations. So the first step we want to take is to determine where we'll call upon each of these functions. Well, think about it for a second. Where are we going to need to fetch items, delete items, add items, or update items? I'd say in main activity this would be a great place to fetch our items, as we're populating our to-do items list here. And so we'll probably want to pull whatever's in the database already and use that to populate our list rather than creating these kind of bogus items. Well, how about adding items? We might want to do that in the add item activity. Seems like an appropriate place to do so when the user presses on the save item action. Now, as well, this page could be used to update and add items. So we'll probably want to find a way to determine whether we're updating an existing item or adding a new item. So we'll probably call the update and add items both in add item activity, and we'll find a clever way to determine which one we're calling. How about deleting items? Well, this one's going to be a little different depending on whether or not you set your long click listener in to-do items adapter. So if you remember in our to-do items adapter, in the long click listener, we're deleting the item from our to-do items list. So if we're deleting it from the list here, probably a good place to delete it from the database also. So we have our 4 locations. We might as well start with the first one, which is going to be fetching the items, as this one's perhaps the more complicated one to call. The others are actually quite simple, just as easy as creating an instance of database operations, calling on the function, and then passing in the parameters. So here, rather than adding these bogus items, let's actually trigger our database operations get function. We'll use a cursor, and we'll fetch all the data and use the cursor's data to populate our to-do items list. So as of right now, we can actually comment this guy out completely, or these 3 lines. So the first thing we need to do is create a database instance, or database operations instance. We're not going to use it anywhere else, so I'm actually going to create it here. It's just going to be a new instance of database operations. Okay, and we'll need to provide a context. We'll just provide the context of this. Now, in order to get the items, we'll simply call upon that database operations, and we're going to get all items. We'll pass in, again, that instance because that's what's needed. And this is going to return us a cursor. So let's create a cursor variable to hold this. And now, if you've never worked with cursors before, cursors work a little bit like tables. So the way in which they return the data is a little like how the data is stored in a table in the first place. So we can iterate through each of the rows in the cursor, and that will represent a new to-do item stored in our database. So in our case, if we had these 3 items in the database, 3 rows, and then again for each of the columns we have a new piece of information. So in column 0 we might have the ID. In column 1 maybe it's the name, column 2 the urgency, column 3 the date. So let's determine which of those pieces of information we need. I'd say we can actually skip out on the ID and the date. We don't really need those to populate our to-do items list. All we need are the name and the urgency. And actually we can calculate the date automatically thanks to our to-do item getDate function. So what we're going to do is use our cursor. We're going to iterate through the cursor's results, get the piece of information we need, create a new to-do item for each of the rows found, and then add it to the list. Now this is all done within a with statement and within a while loop. So we'll say with our cursor, okay, we are just going to iterate through it by calling on this method while move to next. So this is the equivalent to cursor.move to next. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep iterating through the rows until it reaches the very last row, at which point move to next is going to be equal to false or equal to null. So in order to get the information at each of the rows, think about each iteration of this loop as representing 1 row, so 1 complete to-do item. We're just going to get the item name and the urgency. We're not going to bother with the ID or the date. So we'll get a val item name. This is going to be equal to the cursor.getString method. Okay, we need to provide a column index. So if you remember, that's going to be the index of 1. But if we're not 100% sure, then what we can do is call upon a method called getColumnIndex, or throw. We'll just use getColumnIndex, and we're going to pass in the column name. That's going to be a call to tableInfo dot column item name. So what this will do is it will return to us the item name found in the item name column at the, in this case, the very first row, and then for each of the subsequent rows. So we'll do the same for the urgency. We'll set this to be item urgency, and obviously we'll need to change a column we're fetching it from, so we'll go column item urgency. This is going to return a number. We'd like to turn this to a Boolean. So we're going to create a item urgency Boolean, so val is urgent, is going to be equal to if, again, item urgency is equal to 0. Then we're going to store a false, meaning it's not urgent, and otherwise we're going to store a true. Okay. Oh, and you know this is showing up as false because this is get string. This should be get a float, or get double, get int. It doesn't really matter. In our case, let's just go with get int because we actually are storing an integer type variable. Okay, so we have the two pieces of information we need, the name and whether or not it's urgent. We can create a new item. So we're going to say, well, we could create a new to-do item and store that in the list, or we could just store an item in the list directly. So we could just say something like to-do items list dot add, and then we could store a new to-do item. Okay, we need to pass in some parameters. We should probably pass in the name and whether or not it's urgent, so item name and is urgent. And that's really all we need to do. At this point, this cursor will automatically populate our list. It will simply exit or break out of this while loop, and then the with statement, once it's complete and once it's reached the end of all the items in the list or in the items in the database. And again, that is all we need to do. Simple as that. So cursors are really fantastic. Love working with them because they are, again, just so easy to use. I'd recommend you look a little bit further into them if you want to kind of get all of the other methods that might be there. So now what I'm going to do is switch to to-do items adapter, and I'm not going to implement it with you, but I want you to figure out a clever way in which to implement our delete function. Try and think of a way in which we can choose between the saving a new item, so add an item, or update an existing item, and then find a way to call upon those. Really, it's as simple as creating a new instance of database operations, again, calling on the appropriate function, update, or save, or delete item. In the save and update case, you'll need to find a way to determine again whether or not we're saving or updating an item, but that should be the only challenge. So again, go ahead and try it. Pause this video now. In a few seconds, I'm going to show you my solution. Alright, and this is kind of the solution that I've come up with for our 3 other function calls. So this is in our to-do items adapter where we would be deleting an item. So before we remove the item from our to-do list, this is just the same code here, we're going to get the to-do item that we're trying to remove from our to-do list at the position. We're going to then get a new instance of database operations, and then we're going to call upon our dbo.delete item by passing in the item that we have selected. Okay, easy as that, pretty straightforward. So then we'll go to our add item activity, and this is where things are a little more complicated, but not difficult necessarily. So to start off with, I just created a couple of variables up top to help me determine whether or not I am creating a new item. So you see is new item equals true or false, and then we have this old item, depending on whether or not we are actually going to use an old item or not. Okay, so this is assuming, first of all, let's just assume the update. And let's assume that we're passing in an item name and an item urgency. So if the item name is not equal to null, that means there is an item with that name that exists in the database. We're just going to set the old item based on that name, and we're going to say that, okay, we're not dealing with a new item, so we'll set that equal to false. And then we'll go to our save item action. We're going to then get the new name, the new urgency, create a new to-do item based on these new attributes, and then we're going to say, okay, is new item is equal to false because we're dealing with an old item, so we'll call upon our update item function. So this is just going to pass in the old items attributes, the new items attributes, and it will just replace the old stuff with the new stuff. Now let's assume that we are dealing with a brand new item. Okay, is new item is set to be true to start off with. Okay, so we'll go to here. This is equal to null because if we won't have access to the string, so item name is equal to null. We'll simply skip over this, and item urgency is equal to true. That's not necessarily true because it should have the default value of false, so old item isn't initialized, new item is true. So we'll go down to the save item action. Again, we're getting the name and the urgent, creating a new item. And then we're saying, okay, it is a new item. So instead of updating the item, we'll just add a new item to the database. Okay, so again, fairly straightforward. Calling on the functions is the easy part. The more difficult part is determining when, where, and how to call upon the items. So I think we're now ready to test this guy out. As long as everything is working and there are no bugs, then we can kind of do a wrap up for today, and I'll let you guys go. So we'll give this a save. Let's give this a run through. Make sure you have an emulator started. This is just going to take me a second, so I'm going to pause this and start the video once this is loaded. Okay, and I get my to-do list stopping. It's crashing right now. So what do you think is the problem? If we go to our logcat, then we can take a look at the debugger and try to figure out what's going on. So it looks like there's a problem. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to try and figure out what the problem might be. I'll give you a hint. If it's to do with our Android database SQLite exception name, then there's a good chance it has to do with something in our database operations. So just take a few seconds, see if you can figure it out. I'll provide the solution in just a couple seconds here. Okay, so the problem is that in my database operations, I totally forgot to change this back to a blank string. Okay, so we obviously can't have this. There is no column name, like there is no column called column name. So we're just going to delete that, change that to blank string again, and we'll go ahead and rerun the app. So this should be working fine. I'm not sure why this is showing an error here, but that shouldn't be a problem. That should be disappearing pretty soon there. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so okay, got it. Good stuff. Let's open up that emulator again. All right, so no errors so far. Good to go. Let's add an item. So let's say, I don't know, groceries, buy groceries. Okay, we'll just get rid of this keyboard here. Let's say this is urgent, and we'll go ahead and save this guy. Okay, so pretty good. Let's cancel this and nav back. So there we go, looking pretty good so far. Let's say we want to edit this item. Let's say we now want to, you know what, let's actually just set this to not urgent. That's the only change we're going to make. We'll give this a save, go back. It's changed there. Let's say we want to delete the item. If we hold down, it's now deleted. And so I think we're good to go. So that's all 4 of our functions working just fine. The only, well, you know what, I'll talk about some improvements that we could make in the next section. So we can go ahead and give this a stop, and we can wrap up this section here. So this was the last major section I wanted to cover of day 4, just because I know this first section took so long. Do apologize again for that. Should probably have split it into a couple of different portions. But otherwise your app is now fully functioning. So congratulations, you've created a pretty simple to-do list here. Now, like I said, at the end of, or rather, I guess at the beginning of tomorrow and throughout the rest of tomorrow, we'll talk about some improvements that we can make. We'll actually implement some of those improvements. So if you do really want to stop at this point, then your app is fully working and you can, but I would encourage you to look further, look at tomorrow's tutorials as well, and at the very least, just take into consideration some ways in which we could improve the app. Otherwise, we will just do a couple of minutes summary at the end of this, just to kind of go over again what we did today. If you are not that interested, you're kind of okay with everything we did, you can skip ahead. And if you do want that summary, then stay tuned, we'll provide that and we'll be right back.